we have ourselves just come back from the region where we had a series of meetings. We went to Saudi Arabia, to Jordan, to the West Bank, and to Israel. And this is a subject that is of huge interest to us and to our constituents. So it's fantastic to have the opportunity to speak to you today, Minister. Can I just begin, if you don't mind, just clearing up something which arose from our trip, just to get it out of the way? Would you expect, Minister, if there was a visiting delegation of members of Parliament to the House of Commons, for the delegation to be videoed without their knowledge or consent?
If someone was visiting the House of Commons?
Yes.
Certainly not. I would think that'd be very unusual.
Or for it to be put onto Instagram and indeed briefed to, let's say, the Daily Telegraph in disparaging terms.
I'm not familiar with the details, but clearly if someone was visiting the House of Commons, we'd want to show them
And it would be
courtesy.
particularly bad, wouldn't it, if it was the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel who would be videoed in the UK and for disparaging comments to be made about her evidence or her private meeting that she'd had, let's say, with us. Because the opposite has just happened to us. And a video of us at the Knesset meeting the Deputy Foreign Minister has been posted on Instagram. We understand that, certainly we had no knowledge that it was being videoed and assumed, of course, that it would never happen. And I have to say, I've just found out about it. And to say that I'm cross might be an understatement. There were many things said in the Knesset by many members of the Knesset that we found quite provocative and indeed, if I'm really honest, quite insulting. And the attitude of some of the members of the Knesset were remarkably rude. And we did our utmost to keep decorum at all times and to remain polite and restrained. But I do think this takes it to another level. And I would ask the Foreign Office to investigate this, please, and to find out why this has happened, who made the decision, and to ask them to take it down and to apologise.
Chair, thank you for bringing it to my attention. It's obviously the first I've heard about it. I'll look into it and come back to the committee.
Thank you very much.
We were in the West Bank a couple of weeks ago and we saw, as many others have reported, some of the extremist actions by Israeli settlers against Palestinians in Area C. Schools were being burned, mosques were attacked, livestock was being stolen. It's a particularly awful situation. It feels like the UK's response of just providing advice to businesses not to trade in those settlements is not enough in that context, particularly when we have such a strong response to the ICG's ruling on the Chagos Islands. It feels like our response in this case has been much weaker. Are we going further enough? And is it appropriate for us to be negotiating a new trade agreement with Israel under the current situation?
Yeah. So let me say, since this is the first time that settler violence has come up, that the government tracks this closely. We recognise both the increase in settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories and the very worrying increase in violence in relation to settlements. And we condemn that completely, and we've put in place sanctions in October to reflect the strength of our feeling on these questions. In relation to trade with settlements, we are very clear about our position in relation to settlements. We update that guidance to British businesses routinely. We're not an outlier in this. This is the same approach that the European Union takes as well. But we advise British businesses in pretty strong terms to bear in mind our view on the illegality of settlements under international law when considering their investments and activities in the region. That is quite a strong statement from the British government. Were I a British business, I would not be conducting settlement trade.
Why wouldn't you just ignore it?
Because I would think, Chair, that the British government warning me about matters of international law would be quite a serious risk to my business. And given the clarity of both the British and the European position on the labelling of goods, then you would want to, I think, as a British business, assure yourself that you were confident what was from within the green line and what was
What would
without.
happen to you if you were to invest in the West Bank? What would happen to you?
Well, I think if you were found to be inaccurately labelling goods which were traded into the UK or the EU, then there would be consequences.
Would there?
There would be. Yeah.
What consequences have there been?
This is so the question, Chair, I think is: have there been cases where people are found to be inaccurately labelling their goods, which were in fact from occupied Palestinian territories rather than from within Green Line Israel? I'd have to come back to you with what the precise legal consequences are for businesses who inaccurately label their places of origin for their goods, because that's a DBT responsibility rather than an FCDO one.
So label them as Israeli. That's what they do.
So we are aware, that's why we update our guidance so regularly, we are aware of the challenges of ensuring that goods are properly and accurately labelled. The Co-op has done some work on this, for example, to try and ensure that all of their goods, they are confident in them, but we are clear in our position. I recognise the difficulties in enforcement, but we are clear.
Frankly, if the Co-op didn't do it, then nobody would be doing it at all, and good for the Co-op. But, we're talking about a whole range of British businesses, and to be honest, if we just got advice from the Foreign Office saying that they should think twice, what does...
Were I a British business, I would take it seriously.
And is it appropriate, with all of the breaches of international humanitarian law, the ICG rulings, the other challenges with Israel we're going to hear about later in the committee, for us to be pursuing a trade deal with Israel? The government has just announced a trade envoy to undertake that. Are we not going too far?
So we're reviewing a number of our trade agreements and negotiations across the world, and the Secretary of State for DBT will be setting out a little bit more about where we intend to prioritise in due course.
Just turning to settler violence.
Sorry, before we move on, I'm sorry. Can I just ask again, because I appreciate that you say that that you will have more to say if there is annexation, that you have clear views about it, but I mean, what we got, I think, from our, please, if anybody else disagrees with me, do say, but I think the clear impression we got from our visit was that the Israelis don't really care that much about what the international community thinks or says. We want to know what they're going to do about it. And we certainly met many more people who were interested in annexation of the West Bank than we did, who were interested in a two-state solution in amongst the leadership, amongst the politicians. So given that's the situation, can I just ask my question again? What's the plan? What's plan B? What are we actually going to do if they annex? Because we could just be sitting here and it could just happen.
I recognise, Chair, we all see the reports from debates in the Knesset from Israeli politicians. So I'm pleased to confirm to the committee the strength of our views on these questions, but I'm afraid I won't be drawn to speculate into what we might do.
You can assure us that you'll do something.
I can assure you we'll do something.
Okay.
Just a quick follow-up on a point you made earlier when you referenced the importance of the Abraham Accords, and just wondered whether you are taking any steps to push for UK leadership on the Abraham Accords. And, for example, might you consider having a special envoy for the Abraham Accords from the UK?
So we do try and show leadership on a range of issues. So we joined, and I'm sorry for the acronyms again, Chair. We joined CCPA, which is was previously a bilateral agreement for security and investment partnership between the US and Bahrain. We joined it in December, I think, and that was part of our efforts. It came about in the aftermath of the Abraham Accords. We joined it in part out of our commitment to try and, partly our commitment to Bahrain, our commitment to the Middle East, but in part because we do want to see the very positive trend that the Abraham Accords represent, which is towards a region in harmony with each other. That progress has clearly been arrested very significantly by the violence in the Middle East over the last period. We will continue to work with the Saudis, with others, because we do want an Israel at peace with its region, and we'll do everything we can to try and support that.
What specific action will be taken now to prevent annexation from taking place? Because I hear your comment about the action will be taken at the end if annexation is, it goes through, but will it not be too late at that point? Like, what are we doing now to prevent it from becoming complete annexation?
So I think there's and jump in if I'm mischaracterising your question, but I guess there is I took some of the questions about annexation to be about formal legal annexation of occupied Palestinian territories. That is not to say that we are not focused on the elements of practical annexation. You cannot get aid into Gaza without the agreement of the Israelis. That is clearly very significant de facto control. You have seen yourselves in the West Bank the degree of control that is exerted there as well. We want to see in both Gaza and the West Bank a situation where normal Palestinian life can return. We do not want to see forcible displacement. We do not want to see an expansion of settlements and settler violence. All of these things, I mean, the account Uma gives, and indeed Alex, of elements of day-to-day life in the West Bank being impeded by Israeli measures are clearly a degree of de facto annexation of some of the areas, even if they are not legal. And we, on all of these issues in the way that I describe, we are clear with our Israeli partners that we do want to see a reduction in tensions in the West Bank. We want to see in both Gaza and the West Bank freedom for Palestinians to go about their lives.
Minister, if I may, what specific action are we taking to actually prevent the expansion of settlements?
So beyond the sanction measures and the pretty strong diplomatic language that we've used about it, we've worked with partners, we've made joint statements, we have sought at each and every stage to create the conditions where settlements are not happening, and I recognise that we are in the midst of an expansion of those settlements, so we will continue to work on it.
Israel continues to ignore our condemnations and continues to do as it pleases and continues to either cross an uncrossable line or new precedents that they seem to jump over. Will there be a red line for us where we say, that's it, enough is enough? This will now result in the lack of viability of a potential two-state solution. When is that red line going to be for us?
Honestly, Absam, the problem with ever saying that the two-state solution is not viable is the alternatives are definitely and considerably worse. So I recognise that the viability of a two-state solution requires a whole range of very difficult practical policy problems which settlements make worse, and settlements clearly undermine the physical viability of a two-state solution. Does that make me think that the UK government and our partners should pivot towards talking about a one-state solution? No, I don't. I don't think it would work. I think it would be worse. I think, as painful as it is, we need to hold open always the gateway back to a two-state solution, because ultimately that is what will secure security and stability for both Israelis and Palestinians. So I recognise how difficult it is in this moment where settlements are expanding not to give up hope in a two-state solution, but we have to. If voices like Britain do not continue pushing for a two-state solution, then I fear it will be extinguished.